crap. Good afternoon, friends. I'd like to welcome you to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker. It's the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? The answer today, well, the answer is always going to be comic books, folks. I take a fistful of comic books out here, there, and everywhere. We look through them on the camera for your pleasure. There's a little cat who I've spent a good 20, 25 minutes beating the rattly ball with. He seems, for the moment, to be resting. Not restful, resting. So we'll see. We'll see if we can get going here. I grab a pile of comic books and we look through them here for your pleasure. So, first thing I'd like to do is to direct you to the Patreon if you like this show, if you want to encourage this show, if you want me to continue making them, if you want me to make more of them. That's how you register your appreciation in the matter. I got a ton of stuff to download. Possibly at some point I might even put up some videos behind the paywall. I haven't done that yet, but for the moment there's hundreds of thousands of words of my writing for almost a decade. I've had that Patreon up, so a fair amount of stuff. Trying to be better about throwing that one in more. So, let's get started today with a look at the Fantastic Four, and not just any Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four Unlimited #1, cover dated March 1993, so this came out at the tail end of 1992. The Fantastic Four get hit by the 90s hard. Because through the height of the 90s, the Fantastic Four was a very stable, one might even say, conservative comic book in context of everything that was going on around it. Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan, and I think Danny Bulanati for all or most of it, were an extraordinarily solid, creative team in a way that seemed a little bit more, maybe just a little bit more old-fashioned in 1995 when they ended than when they began in 1991, at which point they were just a pleasing throwback. It was a very readable book. It sold. People forget. It sold pretty well. It had spin-offs. The DeFalco, Paul Ryan Fantastic Four was a well-received book in its time. And I think many of the reasons why it did as well as it did maybe didn't seem perishable when the millennium shifted, especially, and it came to be seen as kind of a Bronze Age throwback. I think, buffeted by the Simonson, the woefully abbreviated Simonson run. It could have been much longer in another universe. It was, but we didn't get a second Byrne run on the book, which apparently is something that actually came close to being a reality. So we got Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan, and the book did pretty well. I know I really enjoyed it at the time. There were some times, especially like later in the run, like in the 80s and 90s, it was the book I looked forward to in terms of like being most caught up month to month, like what is happening in this story. It was really good at keeping the pages turning. I haven't gone back to read the whole thing all the way through since it came out. I don't know how my opinion might change if I went back. That seems like something reasonable I might do at some point. But it held up pretty well considering everything else around it was starting to explode. The Fantastic Four wasn't going to really change up that much in the main book. The people who ran the company at the time really didn't want that to happen. However, they put out a lot of comic books in 1992. They put out more comic books in 1993. They may have even put out more in 94, but the writing was on the wall by then. So they started this Unlimited initiative where all their main titles, X-Men, Spider-Man, Midnight Suns got one. I think that one lasted 7 or 8 issues, quarterly issues, so, a 2-year run. And like, the last run of the Midnight Suns titles, it was just one constant crossover that was completely impenetrable to anyone who hadn't been reading the books forever. So the Midnight Suns, as its own line, it didn't last. And neither did 2099. That was actually a wonderful book. 2099 Unlimited was a very interesting anthology. Had a lot of Ernie Colon work, had a lot of really weird names showing up for a Marvel comic in like 1993. The 2099 office hired some good people, even if sometimes they were just nibbling around the edges. But that only lasted as long as the 2099 line did, like I think 10 or 11, I want to say. Spider-Man Unlimited, that lasted throughout the rest of the decade. It sort of petered out, but even through the Clone Saga, I remember the Spider-Man Unlimited stories in the Clone Saga were quite important, because those were the ones that they used to dive into some of the old continuity backstory, because they had to publish all these stories to bring newer readers up to speed on just what the hell was happening. And that was definitely mid-90s in the Spider-Man books. They could not sell enough of those clone books until the moment that they very much could. And then you were left with Cosmic Powers Unlimited. That one didn't last very long, because the Silver Surfer was not able to command his own line of comic books in 1994. And so we're left with Fantastic Four Unlimited, which ran for a while because the Fantastic Four always sold. It maybe didn't sell as well as it could, but it was one of the pinnacles of the company's newsstand performers. Maybe not quite as good as like Amazing, Conan the Barbarian, and Thor. I think those three were pretty much maybe their top three, but this was up there. This was another long-standing name that had a bit of pop culture penetration, so it was one that parents could pick up. And that was an important demographic. Star Wars fits into that as well in a big way, Superman and Batman. And of course, the newsstand fell apart, and all of those strengths suddenly ceased to matter. And the Fantastic Four had to sink or swim based on direct market sales, which is kind of funny on the face of it. But I remember I bought this comic off a newsstand at a gas station. They were still being sold everywhere. And were they putting their best foot forward? Let's find out. So, let's note, the cover isn't even by Herb Trimpe. The cover is by Mark Pacella and Brad Venkata, two very 90s names, but not Herb Trimpe. Now you open the book, that's where you find Herb Trimpe at his 90s best. But he's not inking himself. Mike DiCarlo is inking him. Mike DiCarlo definitely knows how to ink a comic book. It took two people together to make a comic book that looked like this. Two people consciously getting together with decades of experience, huddling around a copy of New Mutants 99 and trying to figure out just what is working about that art. In hindsight, it can seem sometimes like people who know how to draw really well consciously learning to draw worse, which, is something that you can say about a lot of artists at the time. Mark Silvestri is another. Someone who is really puzzled on some level, I think, but tries his level best, as Trimpe does here, with DiCarlo, to sit down and figure out what works about those strange comics selling so many numbers. And this had a good solid run. They got a good, year and a half out of Herb Trimpe drawing extra long quarterly Fantastic Four adventures with Roy Thomas. That's the other part. Because even though this is the Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan Fantastic Four, as you can see by Sue Storm's costume, which, Trust me, we'll get there. But you can trust that it'll also be contiguous with what's happening on that book. Roy Thomas was a pro. He knew how to write spin-offs. He wrote a very readable run of Avengers West Coast. And he knew how to react to what was happening in other people's stories. And I'm sure he didn't like it any more than anyone else did, but he was a consummate pro about it. So he had no problem whatsoever coming in, just about the oldest side gig in the book is you do the annual or the special. You just got to be read up on what's happening in the books, use those versions of the characters, and do something completely different with them. So this issue has Black Panther on the cover, and I want to say every issue of the Fantastic Four Unlimited, it had a big guest star. One issue had the Hulk, one issue had now I'm trying to remember. It was just in my brain. Different aspects. One of them was a nihilist. Different aspects of the Fantastic Four's, big, sprawling support cast. All the mostly Lee Kirby characters. Although there's a lot of history with some of these, and you know that Roy Thomas is someone who, at least by 1993, has read every issue of the Fantastic Four that's ever been published, simply by point of pride. So, he knows what's going on with these dudes. He wrote a fair amount of Fantastic Four comics himself in the regular run of the book. Oh, Troll Dolls and Game Boy games, Kool-Aid Wacky Warehouse. Man, that looks cool. I'm sure someone lost a ton of money on that. So, yeah, Herb Trimpe, Mike DiCarlo, Roy Thomas. These people could have done an issue of giant-sized Fantastic Four in 1975. Maybe Mike DiCarlo, maybe he's not that old. But at least these two guys could have. And they're doing it like 20 years later. And I think, in hindsight, like I say, it's not... What am I trying to say here? It's interesting once you recognize that it really was a good faith attempt on their part. It wasn't sarcastic. It reads, I think, as sarcastic, because this isn't how Herb Trimpe drew for most of his career. And when this period was done, he did not draw like this again, although he never drew the same again. I think it was informative in the same way that studying Liefeld actually turned out to be surprisingly informative for a lot of artists. There are a lot of artists who probably hated his guts, who nevertheless changed something they drew because of him. And that is influence that you cannot gainsay. And it's just stamped all across the era. There's something interesting, I think, in seeing someone actually try to apply what those comics are teaching. Like, okay, you want to actually sit down and read an extreme comic book, a Rob Liefeld comic book, and figure out what makes it work. All right, what you're going to do is you're going to simplify everything you're drawing. You're going to put the figures at the front. You're going to minimize the backgrounds. You're going to do weirdly shaped establishing shots that allow you to focus on close-ups and weird abstruse action. But this actually reads quite well, just like, as we were talking about with that issue of Captain America the other day, most Rob Liefeld comics actually read quite well. I'm not talking about whether or not they're any good. I'm talking about how the art reads on the page. And so too here. You can definitely see, Herb Trimpe is someone who knows how to draw. If you don't know how to draw, at least somewhat, there's no way to know how to warp everything quite like this. It's definitely an attempt to make their styles more primitive in a way, breaking it down to just abstract figure work against color fields with these, but it reads so well. There's nothing lost in terms of actual storytelling action. And now, of course, we can look back and see, oh, well, yes, that's Rob Liefeld, that's Eric Larson, certainly that's Frank Miller, getting all that energy from Japanese comic books, bringing that, trying to put that on the page of American pamphlets, really warping it in some crucial ways, but also, like I say, I think a familiarity with both Fist of the North Star and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is absolutely essential for really understanding what was going on in this period of American comics, because Rob Liefeld was touched by Fist of the North Star, and he decided to draw like that poorly, and it practically demolished the American comic book industry. In the same way that you can look at, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and see, well, there's someone who very clearly has read every page of Fist of the North Star many times. Convergent evolution is the strangest thing. But look, this is interesting stuff. Here's Sue Storm. It's actually a well-rendered Sue Storm. It actually, in detail work, some of it comes out looking like almost like an underground artist, because there's this focus on the illustrativeness of the line that you didn't see in Trimpe before. Very interesting to see where they're putting their detail work. You're not getting full backgrounds on any of this. You're getting close-up backgrounds, no more. This is an establishing shot that doesn't go more than like 5 feet away from the character. And yet, it's completely legible. You're looking at this right now on a really small screen, and yet you can read exactly what's going on physically. Johnny's passed out. He wakes up. He's wet. Someone's like throwing water at him, which is actually something people do to Johnny Storm quite a bit. And then we're back. We're intercutting with whatever's happening with Reed and Sue. And so you got Sue in this costume, which, all right, what I'll say about this costume, as someone who was reading and enjoying Fantastic Four at the time, is it made sense in terms of the plot. She was, at least in terms of 90s comic book logic, she was really mad for a couple years. Really mad. And then her husband died, so she had a lot to deal with. And it actually ended up being quite compelling to see her grieve her husband over like 2 or 3 years in the book. They kept him dead. This is before that. He's still alive. But they're, completely at loggerheads. And this is the version of, at least, them being at loggerheads is the version of them that was in the book for the last year or so, of Reed being alive. Which, in hindsight, that's kind of interesting. A Fantastic Four comic book built around Reed and Sue actually having a serious falling out, and then one of them dying. That's actually a really good hook for the run as a whole. And they keep him dead long enough to see her go through all the stages of grief. And then when he shows up, they're like, man, we got done grieving you. And it was actually quite compelling for those of us who were still hanging on in like 1994 Fantastic Four. It was still readable. I was still reading that first thing when I got home. I was still buying it at the supermarket at that point, I think. Because I could buy it at the supermarket, I did buy it at the supermarket, because I didn't get to go to the comic book store every week, but I did get to go to the grocery store every week. So, here's T'Challa. Looks like he's getting ready to pounce. He's got Well, I'm sorry. I had to go walk around a minute because I haven't read this comic in 30 years. I wasn't prepared because I was turning the page and I was thinking, oh, well, here's Black Panther with a bunch of, flunkies, I guess you'd say. But we don't have the concept of the Dora Milaje or any of that yet. So we got the Panther Posse. I just walked straight into that one. Yeah, that's a thing. So is that Snake Eyes? That looks like the Black Panther's fighting Snake Eyes. I don't know who that is. Is that I don't know. But that's actually a pretty decent looking thing. That's a pretty respectable thing right there. Actually, when you look at it, it has a lot more in common with like Steve Root than you'd think. Look at the dimensionality on that. My goodness. Yeah, and here's a little touch of that 70s Trimpe. Yeah. It has its faults. I think there are places where it goes a bit overboard and it maybe resembles a bit more of Doom Force. If you know the spin-off during the Doom Patrol, that's this very pointed spoof of the Image generation of comic makers. This isn't quite so sarcastic. And this is 3 prose, at least 2 of whom were published in the 1960s, that long and distinguished of careers, deciding they're just going to start drawing like Rob Liefeld now. And telling stories like that. And it ends up being more solid, definitely a lot more readable. But then you get these weird distended faces that, Herb Trimpe trying to draw like Rob Liefeld accidentally looks like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Look at that. It's grotesque. And yet you see now these integuments drawn together across the oceans. You didn't even know that's where that influence was from. But now you do. I realize I've just been passing right by the profusion of video game ads. It's just worth noting. Super Nintendo. Sports cards. John Crook. I remember John Crook. I don't remember a lot of baseball players. I remember John Crook. But, 92 baseball cards are starting to wear down. Cooper's School ad that ran in every comic for years. That's a nice spread. Another, looks like someone was trying to do a bonk port to Super Nintendo. T2, the arcade game, now on Genesis. Also available on Game Boy. Yeah, I don't know if I ever played that one. I think I played the side-scroller. This looks like a target shooter. And those always translated so well to the consoles. Wow, look at Reed Richards with a giant knife. The Wakandans aren't even bothering to use them. That Love of My Life is their era, so they're always talking like the Fantastic Four talk. Oh, my goodness, look at this. This is grisly. Someone just... Did you just rip that guy's head off, Reed? No, he just exploded. Oh, my God. He just hit this man with the fist of the North Star. He cut him and he exploded. There is no other explanation for that. So here's why are these... Okay, the Panther Posse. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, more sports cards. And they're doing more the signed cards gimmicks, so you can tell they were really, really hit hard by the 90s by this point. By 92, yeah, the sports card stores were struggling on the ground in 92, certainly. That's why some of them branched out to comic books. And the only time I ever paid more for a new comic book, more than a newsstand, was when I bought the first appearance of Carnage from a sports card store. Because that's how hot that book was. That's how hot that book was. I had no way of knowing if it would make it to the 7-Eleven. And I think that's one of those books. I think that's one of those books that was in the box that got taken. I think. Man. I don't even like Carnage that much, but I treasure that story. That whole run was just a very readable run of comics. So, yeah, they're doing something in Wakanda. Oh man, look at this claw. Look at this claw. Oh my God, yeah, this is a copy of the Fist of the North Star. Definitely, I'll buy that. Man, look at how grody this looks. This is lots of blood. There isn't usually this much blood in the Fantastic Four. This is awesome. I'm sorry. I would have hated this at the time. I read it. Obviously, I was a Fantastic Four. You know, it's still basically the one book that I buy month in, month out. Regardless of whether or not I'm that into it, it's just it's the one left. And, you know, that counts for something where I'm from. Thick and thin, this drawing of, man, I mean, Sue Storm is jacked. There's just no other way to put it. Look at that. It's grotesque. This leering mouth. Is this a good Black Panther story? I really don't think so. I don't think anyone has ever revisited the Panther Posse unless it was to make a joke about it. Man, I wasn't expecting that. I just turned that page and bam, there you are. No walking away from that one. Wow, look at this. Look at this. That's like something Jim Woodring would draw. That's fascinating. Man, this is a really imaginatively drawn comic book. Oh my God, it's the King Crimson face. I'm starting to think that Herb Trimpe just watched Fist of the North Star, actually, because that looks just like Rao. Even down to the weird helmet thing. So, man, and the monsters keep changing every panel. Man, and these are really imaginative monsters, too. So, Black Panther is getting his butt kicked by all these monsters, because, I mean, you know, you probably get your butt kicked by these monsters, too. But he figures out how to use Claw's weapon to do something or other. I'm not even going to... Man, it's grotesque, dude. This is great. This is great. At the time, I definitely thought that something was amiss, because I knew Herb Trimpe enough by that point to know that this wasn't how he used to draw comic books. And, you know, maybe in hindsight, people say it hurt his career. But in hindsight, you can look back and say, like, well, he was trying. He was trying something different, at least. And I believe it was in good faith. I think at the time it read kind of sarcastic, because Doom Force was kind of sarcastic. There's no question about that. But yeah, this was a very interesting comic book. Is it as good as I'd say Trimpe is at his absolute height? No, I think Trimpe was actually quite a decent artist capable of great feats of artistic ingenuity, but also enough of an interesting artist to change things up sometimes. So we got a backup feature with Roy Thomas writing, Dave Hoover penciling. Looks like just a more straightforward. Oh, he's talking about, oh, well, it's a Roy Thomas story. So he's talking about some guy who Sergeant Fury fought back in the war, some Nazi who had something to do with Wakanda. Yeah, okay, so bad stuff happening. There was I don't know if this has anything to do with, Christopher Priest did an extended, I think a couple issues of Golden Age stuff with the Black Panther and Captain America. Just, a lot of stuff in that run was dedicated to recontextualizing the Panther's relationship. Not changing necessarily anything that happened. More elaborating on just what was going on. Oh, that's actually kind of cool. He has to go into the jungle. Is this his rite of his rite of passage where he first takes the herb that eats the heart-shaped herb, and then he has to kill a panther and take the panther's skin? Man, that's cool. That is a cool looking T'Challa. You gotta admit, that's awesome. And so he has to fight this Nazi dude who's up to Nazi stuff. And or is this his ancestor, his father or something? Yeah, maybe that's his father. I must prove worthy the son of T'Chaka, son of Chanda, the first Black Panther. So, okay, yeah, that's one thing that there's going to be a lot more Black Panthers in the history of Wakanda after Christopher Priest gets done with the series. And, Houston. Is it Houston who does it after that? I like that run. It had its faults, but the one that came after Christopher Priest, it was going to get pilloried for not being Christopher Priest. But it was very readable. It had John Romita Jr. on it, too. So, yeah, they're still selling the X-Men VHS tapes. Man, look at that. Look at how many titles. That's too many titles for a subscription form to have. Way too many. Oh, and this ad. This notorious ad. It's a good bet the kids' favorite mutants ain't turtles. This is such a fascinating ad because the turtles were the hip and trendy knockoff of the X-Men. And the X-Men were popular long enough for them to be hip and trendy next to the Turtles, who were in the big zenith of their Saturday morning cartoon phase at this time. History is a strange, strange place, my friends. All right, here's a fun one. House of Mystery 318. This is from the early 80s, 1983. When I get the chance, the first thing I look for on the back issue bins these days is early DC's horror books, horror anthology books. They published a lot of them in the early 80s up to 83 or 84, when they basically start dying, and then they get another year out of House of Mystery with Elvira's name on it, actually. But by then, they're just not doing well enough to support the genre. And like war books, they sort of faded out by the mid-80s. But just because they were maybe not in the zenith of their popularity sales-wise, it did not mean that the books flagged creatively, which is why I've been going back and picking them up sight unseen. If I see an issue I don't have and it's a reasonable price, and even this isn't in the best shape, but it was only a couple bucks. So definitely a priority. House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Tales of the Unexpected, Ghosts, all those. They ran for years. And you open them up and you find very interesting things. Covered by Kaluta, of the vampire character, who I have to admit I've grown fond of in recent years. I think his new 52 run was one of that initiative's more interesting titles. I did a video of that on the TikTok channel, so early into the format change, the new 52 run on that, early work by Andrea Sorrentino. This is the first run of the vampire character that had a number of decent to very good artists on it over the course of its run. And this feature basically kept the book afloat for a couple of years, maybe, that it wouldn't have had. This guy had, a decent amount of popularity. It was more or less a gothic romance book with a vampire character. Very much, I think, influenced to a degree by something like Dark Shadows. Maybe even this is 1983. It's possible. This was already influenced by the first Anne Rice vampire books. Vampires were, changing in the 80s. And this character was definitely a part of that, a heroic protagonist defined primarily by his romantic entanglements. That's definitely a very au courant interpretation of the vampire from 1983. So like I say, they got a good few years out of that guy. His whole deal was basically he was in love with, two women were in love with him. One of them was the evil queen of the vampires who wanted to destroy humanity, and the other was a sort of dishwater character who was nevertheless very pretty. So two very pretty redheads warring for his attention. That's the motor of the series. So you see why it's maybe cut from a different cloth. So House of Mystery, they always had this frontispiece with Cain. He's feeding his rats and saying something nasty. Greetings, devil disciples. Cain, your horrifying host here, speaking to you from the devastating depths of the Paris metro. What do you ask? This does not look like gay Paris. Maybe to you, my fiends, but one of my stories takes place in the city of love. And what good is an intro page if not an introducing anything? That's terrible. So, yes. Cain and Abel, they were mainstays of these books, and they were smuggled into later continuity by Neil Gaiman, who actually gave them a significant part of Sandman, and they've been ensconced in their corner of the DC universe ever since. This still has the basic shape of an EC comic, even though, Joe Orlando's name is still on the book as a vice president editorial director, but the immediate editing duties have passed down into Karen Berger's hands from Len Wein. She inherited the book. Bob Rozakis, the Answer Man, production manager. Paul Levitz, vice president already, so a lot of familiar names on the masthead here. So this is Dan Day with Tom Sutton inking. So this was Dan Mishkin and Gary Cohen writing the book. Look at that. Adrian Roy coloring. Look at this. Look at this page. Look at this page. The character gets a created by credit for J.M. DeMatteis. So one of J.M. DeMatteis's first, someone who really needs to get a lot more appreciation. Added quite a bit to this industry. So, but by now he's passed the character on to other writers. And Dan Day, he was one of many artists who came to the book with a really distinctive style. This is very interesting. It's a world apart from Ernie Colon. Kind of grotesque. There's that word again. But yeah, this is a horror book. He's a vampire. He's in paroxysms of agony. Wow, look at this. Look at this hatching. This is fantastic. Oh, early D&D ad. 1982 TSR. They never should have sold out. My goodness, so many companies should have stayed independent. That's the lesson of the last 20 years of the economy, I'll tell you what. And you know, DC, they were bought by Warner Brothers relatively early in that process. So look at this. This is nice looking. And see, he's walking around a European city with an attractive with an attractive redhead. Later, as Deborah and I strode through the fullness of daylight, so he's been changed from a vampire into a real human. A new kind of vampire. So he can be out in the daytime and he can eat food. But they still have something or other to do. So there's some sort of magic. You know, he's a good vampire, so he can do interesting things, I guess. That's an interesting page. Someone's reading their Miller. This looks like someone's been reading, Frank Miller Daredevil. But also, like, 1994 Frank Miller as well. with all this really broad use of silhouette. Very interesting. Yeah, this is an interesting comic book. It's not necessarily what I expected, because I have a bunch of random issues of House of Mystery with I, Vampire, and I didn't remember what was in this one. I thought this might be Ernie Colon, but no, I wasn't expecting anything like this. This is fantastic. Look at this. Wow. Look at that. Look at that. My goodness. Yeah, House of Mystery with I, Vampire and the New 52 I, Vampire. You need to go look for those series. Both of those runs of comic books are worth you tracking down. But House of I, Vampire, it only got half the book. The other book was still an anthology. So George Cashton, art by Los Montales Mediceni. I don't recognize that name at all. But it's very interesting. This looks like something from a Gold Key book at the time. Very competent. But also a little bit square. Next to even what was going on in Superman and Batman at the time. Still had the Sergio Aragone's masthead, even though he was long gone from the book. He was 6 years gone from these books by this time. Oh, so they get 2 pages. And, 2-page letters pages, they were a staple of Karen Berger's Vertigo as well. She kept those as long as people wrote in. Coming comics. So you're right in the heart of the Dan Spiegel, Mark Evanier Blackhawk, the Eric Son of Thunder run with Roy and Dan Thomas again. This is Adrian Gonzalez, inks by Alfredo Alcala. Ernie Colon did a lot of Eric. Highly recommended. I've actually looked at both Eric and Blackhawk on the TikTok. Haven't looked at much Legion on the channel. Maybe I need to do that. Wonder Woman by Dan Mishkin. Don Heck was still doing monthly comics at this point on Wonder Woman. Chuck Patton drawing Justice League of America. So not a bad lineup of comics. And this is before, or no, this is after. This is 84. So if this is, no, 83, sorry. If this is 83, then we're just getting ready for Alan Moore to come on board and really change the complexion of DC's horror line. Really saves DC's horror line, enables it to evolve into something something different, and survive into the well into the 90s and the 2000s. Bill Kelly, Angel Trinidad, S. Boy. I don't recognize any of these names. Nancy Houlihan, but Karen Berger, editor. Look at this. I don't recognize any of these names. This is a gorgeous story. Look at this. Has this got the code on it? Yeah, this gets away with more. You know, the code had obviously loosened up significantly since 1954. Yeah, this is pretty gruesome looking. I have to say, this is a nice looking story. And this was when they were still putting out Sergeant Rock toys in the early 80s. Remco. So he's working at a newspaper called The Bugle, is that it? Oh, flying a bit too close to the sun on that one, DC. That's not worth it. It's a nice looking story, see? 3 artists who maybe you never even heard of before I showed you that comic book. Very interesting looking comic book. Never know what you're going to get with old school 70s, 80s DC horror, but you never walk away disappointed. How about some Gen 13? Not just any Gen 13, Alan Davis Gen 13. What? Alan Davis Gen 13? Can such a wonder exist in this fallen world? Yes, my friend. Yes. Mark Farmer, Alan Davis, Gen 13 bootleg number 1. This was, I believe, 96? 1996, November 96. So this was coming out fall 1996. Gen 13 was still doing pretty well. It wasn't necessarily a titan like it was in like the first year and a half when it was really unstoppable. But, you know, it pretty soon leveled down to a mid-tier book. Maybe late 96 is a bit late in the cycle to launch the spinoff, but they got a good year out of, a little over a year, I think, on a Gen 13 anthology with high quality creators on it. So we got, I think, maybe 2 or 3 issues with Alan Davis writing and drawing, Mark Farmer on inks. Oh, here's the Winona Earp character. Is it my imagination, or did they do a television series based upon this character? Rednecks, vampires, trailer parks, and flying lead. What real man could resist this decidedly different new series? Yeah, you know, this should have been a Top Cow book. You look at that and think, how is that not a Top Cow book? And yet, Wildstorm. Oh, man. Oh, man. Oh, yeah. I have no idea what's going on. Alan Davis was always one of those guys who could always just design characters on the fly, so it's not unusual to read one of his books and just find a whole panoply of new characters that he just designed for the hell of it, for one issue. So there's all these, he just introduced this whole new team of characters in this 2-page spread. We haven't even seen the rest of Gen 13. We only got Fairchild and Fairchild's derriere. Because, of course, it's Gen 13. You know, she could wear any costume she chose. She chose to wear that costume. DV8 had just gotten started. Yeah, so I mean, it was still pretty popular. DV8, I don't think was quite as popular, nowhere near as popular as Gen 13. But Gen 13 had multiple spin-offs at the time to tell you how popular the title was, at least in the first blush of its success. Grifter 6, Stephen Grant. They had people like Stephen Grant writing their books at this time. You know, in hindsight, I wouldn't have paid any attention to Grifter in 1996. But in hindsight, Steve and Grant Grifter might be kind of interesting. Definitely an underrated writer of action stories. So, yeah, they're doing some. There's the team in flashback. So we're figuring out why this is happening, and so there's a flashback with the Gen13 gang in their natural, in their people clothes. Something happens to them, and then we see, oh, they've been transformed somehow. So Roxy is a Bride of Frankenstein makeup got going on. Grunge is dressed in a pirate outfit. Oh, meet Jim Lee, J. Scott Campbell, and the rest of the Wildstorm crew at the 1996 Las Vegas Comic-Con, December 14th and 15th, at the Sands Expo. Scheduled to appear Matt Broom, Travis Chiré, Joe Chodo, Brandon Joy, Richard Friend, Alex Garner, Mike Heisler, Sandra Hope, Troy Hubbs, Jason Johnson, Juvan Kirby, Tom McQueenie, Jeff Marriott. Jesus, this was everyone who ever worked on a Wildstorm comic book. Jeff Marriott, Ryan Otogawa, Jonathan Peterson, Tom Rainey, Edwin Rossell, John Teague, and many others. Also appearing in tiny print, Mark Silvestri, Bat, Al Simmons, Billy Tucci, and many, many more. This was 1996. You probably should have put Billy Tucci's name in bigger print. I'm just saying. And Mark Silvestri was writing pretty high in a little book called The Darkness, which I believe we've looked at on this show, although not a Mark Silvestri issue. Backlash. Oh man, I knew a kid in high school whose favorite book in the entire world was Backlash. And I didn't get it at the time. I don't know if I get it now either. But it had its fans. You can't say it didn't have its fans. It lasted to 27 when not many Wildstorm books were making it to 27. Oh, there's Free Fall in the Nude, which is actually something that happened fairly frequently in the book. Because it was Gen13. It wasn't a bad girl book. It was a good girl book. And of course, Gen13 eventually gave way to Danger Girl from J. Scott Campbell, which I adore. At least the J. Scott Campbell stuff, I will absolutely recommend. And you may think I'm mad, but I tell you, it is good. Good comic book stuff in that run. So Warren Ellis is, by this point, writing a significant amount of the Wildstorm line. This is in the very tail end of Stormwatch 44. It's very near to when all the Stormwatch dudes are going to get killed at the hands of aliens and then brought back as the Authority. And I say, if you can't kill a team of Gomers with the aliens from the Fox movie Aliens, then you can't really do the Authority. I'm sorry. That is pretty hard and fast in my rule book. Oh, Wildstorm Ultimate Sports Trading Cards. A 90-card set featuring all new art by Jim Lee, Tom Rainey, Jason Johnson, Adam Hughes, Brian Stelfreeze, Joe Phillips, Tom Coker, Trevor Scott, Matt Broom, Cully Hamner, Jason Pearson, Marty Egeland, Popman, Randy Green. So there's a lot of significant names for the time doing sports work that has probably never been seen again. Maybe it probably didn't do very well because no one was doing sports books. By the late 90s, there were no sports books, barring the cartoons, which exist in their own parallel universe. So I'm not paying any attention to anything that's happening in this comic. It's Alan Davis drawing Gen13, doing something with a bunch of characters who are never going to be seen again. And here's some lanky looking dude with saber-tooth claws. Some warped version of Lynch, who is not the most trustworthy person to begin with. Grunge has become a werewolf. Werewolf fighting Bride of Frankenstein here. They got Zombie Fairchild, Devil Girl, Freefall. Burning Skeleton, Burnout. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And Lynch is now a beast, a dog. That's awesome. I don't know what's going on, but this is awesome. But then she's still naked in the Garden of Eden. This whole jungle scenario, it's my wish come true, harmony with nature, solitude. Then I appeared, and my subconscious somehow created the cat to drive you away. Wildstorm stickers, stick them up. What? Act Stark? It's stronger. Oh, I don't. Oh, these are different languages. So there's Hawaiian, German, Tagalog, Kwasa. Yeah, why? I don't. Okay. All right, so Gen 13 bootleg. Welcome to the first issue of Gen 13 bootleg. Here it is, a brand new Gen 13 book to hold you over while we're waiting for the other Gen 13 book to come out. Yeah, this was the end of '96, and they were still, it was still an issue. And eventually, they're going to get Steve Dillon. Steve Dillon has a Gen 13 issue. He does an annual, I think, and more of the book. I want to say wait, no. Maybe he only does the annual, because Gary Frank has a very long run on it, like a good year or so. Maybe 2 years. And then, of course, Adam Warren has a run at the very end of the run. So yeah, they're good creators through the run of Gen 13. And they're good creators through the run of Gen 13 bootleg, even though I don't think it lasted anywhere near as long. So here's, speaking of Backlash, here's Brett Booth, Pages for Sale. That's interesting. You didn't usually see Pages for Sale in the back of a comic book, but Brett Booth doing it. So, story and ink, Mark Farmer did the story. Pencils by Alan Davis. Color by Joe Chodo, who was doing a lot of Wildstorm and Top Cow work at the time. L. Louis Bahalis. Interesting. See her name on a lot of books. And there's Wildstorm is still at Image, although not for long. Well, we only got through 3. That's, I'm sorry, folks. Sometimes I like to have the company. I like to have someone to talk to. So the time gets away from me. But we talked about some very interesting comics this week, I think. If you like the show, tell all your friends about it. Spread the word. Make sure everyone you know and love is watching this show. Check out the Patreon. There's a ton of stuff. Hundreds of thousands of words of my writing there for you to download. And if you want to support this show, if you want to support the videos that I do for the TikTok or the Instagram, that's where you do it. That's where you make your appreciation known and where you tell me that you want me to keep doing what I'm doing. What else? Check out my daily comic book reviews on those platforms I just mentioned, the TikTok and Instagram. I enjoy doing them. People seem to enjoy reading them. I have a podcast with Claire Napier called Udder Madness. We talk about Top Cow Comics. That's Mark Silvestri. That's Michael Turner. That's Witchblade. That's The Darkness. That's Cyberforce. That's Fathom. That's all that good stuff. It's about Tomb Raider. We have a lot of fun. We're on Spotify. We're on SoundCloud. We're on YouTube. We have videos on this channel that I've constructed myself. I've put together annotated editions of older shows. I'm flashing one of the title cards on the screen right now, just a click away, I'm sure. What else is there? Well, check out my work every week at the Comics Journal. I usually have something or other posted there, a review at the very least, sometimes a feature article for your enjoyment and edification. Just have a wonderful day. Enjoy yourself, enjoy your life. Take a nap if you need to. Be kind to animals. Be kind to small children. Be kind to the world. Do well and be well, and I'll see you next time.